If God be with us, who can be against us? Is the key to this subject this morning. Because only through faith can you know God. And if you know God, you have sufficient courage for all things. So realize that. Courage through faith means that you must first know God. Know Him in a dynamic way. And then surely you will have all the courage that you need. And faith is the way that you know God. No other way, as I shall try to explain this morning. Now, first let us understand a little about belief and faith. Belief is all right if it spurs you on to investigate something. Investigate, for instance, self-realization. If it spurs you on to do that, then through your investigation, you realize what self-realization is. Belief is all right. Belief is not sure, though. There's a doubt in belief. Realize that. There's always a doubt there. You believe a thing will come true. You hope it will. There's a question whether it will or not. But in faith, you know it will come true. And now when you know God, through faith and contact Him, you know He is with you. You have sufficient courage for all things. But if you say, I believe God will do this for me, there's a little doubt there, don't you see? But when you know God through faith, there'll be no doubt. Faith means that you know a thing to be true. Belief means you hope it will be true. There is a doubt in belief. In faith, there is no doubt. I have a definition here which perhaps will help you, which the Master gave one time. Belief is an essential experimental feeling about the truth of anything. There's a little doubt there. You've got to experiment to see. But faith is the positive knowledge about the truth of anything. Positive knowledge. When you have faith, you know. Why is that? Because faith comes from the intuition of the soul. And soul knowledge through intuition is exact. It knows. And that is why. When you have faith, there is no doubt. You know. Because the soul is none other than God's presence within you. And realize that faith gives you the evidence of things unseen through the senses, but which are true. Faith gives you the truth about a thing. You call it the noumena, the underlying reality of life. Phenomena is the outward form of life, but noumena is the underlying reality. Faith gives you the knowledge of that noumena, not phenomena. Phenomena we receive how? Through the senses, through the mind, through the intellect, through inference, through feeling, lower feeling. But in faith we know through the intuition of the soul, far removed from ordinary sensation, mind and intellect. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. Now, as I have said, belief is based on the testimony of the senses, phenomena. But through faith, we know the underlying cause of things. And the underlying cause within you and within me is the presence of God. And if you know that, if you are one with that and have made the contact of the presence of God within you, and you know that His will and His consciousness is your own consciousness and will, and that by being one with Him you can utilize it, Don't you think you'll have courage? That's what you have to know. You have to know these things, and you know them through faith. Realize that your own consciousness is none other than God's consciousness, and your own will is none other than His will when you couple it with His will. Now, when you can utilize that, don't you think you're going to have courage? Certainly. So that's the answer to the question this morning. Courage through faith. Certainly, faith gives you absolute knowledge that God is within you, and the presence of God is your own consciousness and will. Self-realization helps you to do that, helps you to know that through faith. Realize that, you will have sufficient courage. Now, when we were young, you will remember how carefree you were. Everything was fine. Why? Because somebody else was taking the load. I remember with my father, listen, that was it. There was nothing else I needed, because I knew He'd take care of me. But then, I began to look around, as we all have done, and I saw that other parents were taken away. And then I began to realize that He also would be taken away. And so I began to doubt the security of my father and my mother, my parents, as we all have done. And so, when the Master came along in my life, He showed me distinctly the difference between the security which you have in your parents and worldly things, and the security which you have in the presence of God within. And so He showed me that. And then I realized that security would not come except when we know the sole doer of this universe and this cosmic dream, and are one with Him. We know the giver of all things. And also I remember the Master pointed out that the parents give you your body, but the Guru gives you God. Soul security, the giver of all things. So then I realized that I must know Him if I was to feel that security which I demanded. Being a child of God, I must know my Father. I must know Him in a conscious, dynamic way. I must know Him as my very consciousness and life. That's what the Master gave me. And so realize that's where our security is, and if we're going to have courage, through faith, we have to have the faith to know God, realize Him as a reality, our only reality. That's why all the saints say, God alone. When the Master was leaving Boston and I was a little bit disturbed, and he saw it, he said, never mind what happens to me. Imagine. Never mind what happens to me. That light which you see is far greater than I am. That's God Himself. In other words, he said, therein you will find your security, not in me as a personality. He could have said, in the omniscience of God which flows through me, yes, you will find security. And that, when he passed away, I remember, when I was told, it just seemed for an instant as if somebody pulled something out from under me. Everything was lost. Then I remembered his words, and I looked there, and I felt peace. Why? Because the Master's omniscience is one with God's omniscience. He knew it. He had verified it through faith. You and I have to do the same thing. And so realize these things, that our security is not in outward things, not in relations, not in a bank account, not in anything but God alone. He is our security. Now we have Jesus' words, which I'll read, about the sole doer and the giver of all. He pointed it out clearly, as all true prophets do, when he says, which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? We don't even have to add the 1 cubit. Who can make 1 cell of the body? Who can make 1 cell? And then when you think of all the vegetative functions going on in the body, breathing, assimilation, and these fine intercommunications that go on in the body between the hormones and the different functions of the body, who can do that? None other than God alone. And so Jesus said that. And he said, why take ye thought of raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, and they toil not, neither do they spin. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe ye? O ye of little faith! There is your answer to courage. O ye of little faith, you do not know God that is within you and who does all these things, takes care of all things. He is the sole doer. And when, through following the techniques of self-realization, you realize his presence within you, and you feel him dynamically there, when you do that, then you know that this idea of free will is not the thing. You don't want any more free will. You realize you have nothing to do with the whole cosmic dream. You realize God alone is the doer. Realizing that, you say, Father, take your free will. All I've had from it is trouble, following this and that. I know now that you are with me. I know you are the doer. I know you can sustain me. That's all I want, Father. Here I am. So realize that. You can know it only through faith. You can't know it through intellect. You can't know it through the mind or sensation. But you can know it through faith, as I will try to point out now. So then we come to this point. We must cultivate faith. In the light of Jesus' words, we must know the presence of God within us in a dynamic way. We must realize that. We must know God alone is the doer, and that it is he who is our own consciousness, our own power, our own strength. We must realize that. And so, let us understand at this time the deeper metaphysical meaning of the word faith. Faith comes from a Sanskrit word which means what? It means without breath. That's all, without breath. And when you can retain that consciousness of yours in a state when the breath has been quieted down, heartbeat has been slowed down, breath has been stilled, then you will know. You won't know through belief. You won't think through belief. You won't feel through belief. You won't know through sensation, mind, or intellect. You will know through the power of God in you. And that comes when you are in the breathless state. I don't think you're going to die because many of these people here have done it. Look at them. They're all right. Many know what I am saying is true. Because when the breath slows down, outward consciousness has been left behind. It has been superseded by what? By faith. By intuition. That's the state wherein you can know God is. And know God exists right within you. You see how wonderful it is. I remember when the Master told me that. I was trying to understand faith as we all have been. And he said, you know the Sanskrit word for faith means without breath? Then I knew what faith was. I knew it came when this outward consciousness had been done away with. And I was in that state of intuition or the presence of God. That's why St. Paul said, I die daily. He died to outward consciousness. He knew the breathless state. And so we have these two states of consciousness. It seems strange to divide our activities that way, but it's so. One is the state wherein you breathe, and the other is the state or the state known as the breathless state. Now, in the first state, we're in what consciousness? Ego consciousness. We own everything. We know everything. Think we do. That's right. That's a state of breathing. And the more you're in it, the faster you breathe, the more you're taken up with activity and such things. And so, in this state of breathing or this state with breath, we're in ego consciousness subject to the testimony of what? Senses, mind, intellect, and inference, and feeling. That's what tells us all things. Can you depend on it? No. Of course you cannot. Now, in the breathless state, you receive the testimony of what? Of the presence of God within you, as your own soul, through its intuition. That state of consciousness never fails. And in that state, you know that God is within you and that He is your own consciousness. And so we can see that we must learn to know this breathless state, to cultivate this breathless state. St. Paul did it. He said, I die daily. In other words, I have learned, he might have said, to supersede this ego consciousness, which gives me nothing but trouble, with the reality within me of God's presence. And so he says, I die daily to that. And I imagine he said it just like that. Because how do you feel when you get out of that state of consciousness? How do you feel in your meditation? You feel the bliss and presence of God. Don't you feel good? Don't you have all the courage you need when God is with you? Certainly you do. And so we must cultivate that breathless state, as St. Paul did, and as many of you do, I know, in the deep meditative state, you have the same state of which St. Paul had, the breathless state. Now, in that state, when there is no concern about outward things, when your thoughts and sensations cannot bother you, in that state, you feel faith. You know God is. You know you are. You know you are a child of His, and you know you have sufficient courage for everything you need. And so we must cultivate that deep state of meditation. Learn to get into breathless state. Learn to know that breathless state. Now that doesn't mean a lack of life and activity. It means just the beginning to live. Because then you're going to live in reality, in the real eternal consciousness of God within. Now you have a witness of that breathless state. You have a witness that you're in it. And with that witness comes faith. What is that witness? It is the presence of the spiritual eye at this point. In that spiritual eye, you have the witness of God's presence within you. You have the outer ring of vibrating energy of which we've spoken many times. And if you merge in that, you become one with God's presence in all His creation, vibrating. The great light has become all of His creation. And so, when you are one with the outer ring of vibrating energy and the witness of God's presence within you, as the spiritual eye which you see at this point, you can become one with all that creation of His. And if you become one with the dark center, you can feel His presence in all creation. Then, if you really mean business with God, and concentrate right in the center of that light, and really concentrate, then you'll be one with God the Father, even beyond this creation. Don't you think you'll have courage then? If you do that, if you merge in that, then you will have faith. Then you will have the evidence of things not seen. As we read in our Bible, faith is the evidence of things not seen. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, the things which God hath prepared for those who love Him. That's the point. We don't love God enough. When you see His presence, which many of you do as the spiritual eye, right in front of you, that's the presence of God. What do? Introspect yourself and see where your mind and consciousness is. It doesn't stay on the presence of God. It goes all around. And you catch yourself after several minutes or sometimes a half an hour, wandering all around, doing everything but loving God. If you really love God, you'll keep your consciousness right in the center of that light, where God's greatest power is. That's why in the Gita it says, He who never loses sight of me, I never lose sight of him. If I see you as I do now, and I do not take my consciousness off of you, how can I lose sight of you? How can you lose sight of me? So that's the key to faith. As you meditate and see the presence of God in you as the spiritual eye, the spiritual light, you must be one with it, on whom you see the Spirit descending and remaining. You must be one with that consciousness. Merge in it. Then God knows you really want Him and love Him. Until you do that, you cannot have true faith. You cannot really know God. But we can if we follow the example set by the Master, follow the techniques which He has left. We can make that contact with God. Knowing that, having that contact with God, we will have sufficient courage for all of our needs. But realize that one thing, if you do not realize anything else this morning, that when you meditate and within you contact the presence of God as the Word, as the holy sound, cosmic sound, as the eternal light of God at this point, the cosmic light, or in your heart you feel the great love of the infinite Father as bliss and peace and joy. If you can keep your consciousness on that, God cannot escape you. If you can keep your concentration through self-control, one with that presence of God within you, you have God then. There's nothing else you have to attain. But as you introspect, you'll find that your consciousness slips away. How long is it on the presence of God within you? How long is it on Divine Mother within you? Analyze yourself. That's where you must begin. And when you will analyze, you will find, just for a moment, you're united with Him. But you must stay united by the power of your will, which is God's presence within you. You must, by self-control, keep your consciousness on the presence of God within, on His great light. And if you can do that, God cannot get away from you. And then you'll know what the Gita means. He who never loses sight of me, I never lose sight of him. That's all the answer to the whole problem. It's difficult. When you try to meditate, you know how difficult it is. But we must do it. We must be saved. We must know God. Then we'll have sufficient courage for all of our needs. Faith gives courage because by faith we know the presence of God within it. And I'd like to close just by reading from the Scripture, first from Hebrews, the 11th chapter. First and third verses first. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for. How much we long to know God. I had a devotee who was down in Encinitas yesterday, and she says, I have only one desire in life. I have the greatest longing. I must know God. That's the way we must feel. Then if we do that, we will have the evidence of things not seen. We'll have the evidence of God within us. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. In other words, through faith, the delusion will be taken away. And this world, which seems to be made up of certain substances, is not made up of those substances. It's made up of the consciousness and the power of God. That's all. God created light. And so, this world is made up of light. None other than God's presence in you as light. Know that light, you will have sufficient faith for all your need. And finally, from Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, 2nd chapter, 4th, 5th, and 9th verses. And my speech, says St. Paul, and my preaching was not with the enticing words of man's wisdom, not through mind and intellect, and sensation which others talk about, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. Certainly, if you know God, you'll have faith, and you'll have His power with you, because God is all. That your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Isn't that wonderful? Listen, let us not try by our own meager intellect and mind and power to know these things. Let us first know God, then we'll have sufficient strength, because it will be His power which will manifest through us. And finally, the 9th verse, with which you are all familiar. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man, the things which God hath prepared for them who love Him. If you love God really, and if you feel Him, and know Him, know His presence within you, then you will know all things, because then you will have faith. Having that faith, you will have sufficient courage for all things. And if God is with us, and you know it, who can be against you? Who can be against you?